Hello, and welcome to another weekly edition of The Wrap, your chance to get caught up on the week that was and some of the week that will be in North Carolina politics. I'm Travis Fain, one of WRAL's state government reporters.
And I am Will Doran, another state government reporter.
So this week, or at least over the last weekend, we had, the real spotlight was on D.C., and we don't talk about D.C. a ton, Congress a ton, but I think we got to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because the House of Representatives done blew up. And now Patrick McHenry, a longtime congressman from here in North Carolina, is the interim Speaker of the House.
Yeah, he's someone who's been in Congress for almost 20 years. I think his 19th year, but not really a household name in North Carolina. I don't think most people would have any idea who he is. He's kind of quietly risen up to the ranks where he is now the most powerful person in the House.
To the extent anyone in the House has power, yeah. He was Kevin McCarthy, now former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy's kind of right-hand man, and is, with the House kind of in disarray, he will be the interim Speaker for how long? Do we know how long, Will? I mean, I guess
until they pick somebody. And there is a question on whether or not he's going to run to keep the job full-time. He hasn't really said yet, but every indication from talking with other members of the congressional delegation from here in North Carolina, people who know McHenry, sounds like he's probably not going to go for it.
Yeah, and you talked to Congresswoman Deborah Ross from here in Wake County about, they've got kind of a cool relationship, she and McHenry. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they've known each other for 20 plus years. They were freshmen together in the state legislature back in 2003. So, they did the freshman orientation, got to know each other, kind of went their separate ways, but they're now serving in Congress together again. They're actually home brewing a beer together right now, which I imagine that's kind of being put on hold as everything else blows up. But
what do you know what kind of beer?
It's an IPA.
Oh,
it's a hazy IPA.
Oh, it's a super dank.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? I expected no less of an effort. You got a story on that coming up if people want to read more.
Yeah,
okay.
Check that out. But I asked her, has he told you? Is he running? And she's like, he hasn't told me, but it doesn't seem like it. And, so I said, okay, well, because, McCarthy's out because no Democrats stepped up to save him. They just kind of sat back and let the more incendiary parts of the GOP just blow up his speakership. So I said, hey, Republicans still have the majority. What's it going to take for Democrats to, vote for some sort of Republican for speaker to, or is that even on the table? And she said, we would vote for a Republican who's willing to work with us. And so far, we just haven't seen that.
Yeah, I think we're kind of a long way from that being on the table, but we shall see. I saw an interesting theory. So we had we used to be a 10-3 split in the congressional delegation here in North Carolina, and then when they redrew the maps the last time, a political gerrymander was found, and so the courts made them redraw it. Actually, had other people, special masters, redraw it. And now we're 7-7 because we added a seat, so we got 14 seats in the House. If North Carolina had not done that, if we had a 10-14 or a 9-5, let's say, split in the delegation, you give just a little bit wider Republican majority in the House of Representatives, maybe this whole thing doesn't fall apart. So North Carolina, under this kind of theory, real important once again in national politics.
Maybe, but I mean, look at who led the revolt against John Boehner. It was Mark Meadows from here in North Carolina. I don't think there's necessarily a guarantee that, should North Carolina have had more Republican members of Congress, then, McCarthy wouldn't have gone down.
Don't be questioning the political theories I read on Twitter and don't remember who came up with it, okay? Speaking of Twitter, Congressman Dan Bishop took to Twitter today, Friday, backing Jim Jordan for the speakership. That is, I believe, also former President Donald Trump's pick for the speakership, Jordan out of Ohio. Who, honestly, the reason I know who he is because when he was at Ohio State, he was accused of covering up a molestation scandal with the wrestling team.
And not just like a one-off kind of thing. I mean, it was a systemic problem that they had there.
Right. There was this doctor up there who was, credibly accused by multiple people of molesting them on this college wrestling team. The university, I'm reading from a CNN report here, found that this doctor abused at least 117 male student patients between 1979 and 1998. The doctor died by suicide in 2005, and multiple people told CNN that Jordan, when he was at the university, knew about it. And that just seems to have gone away somehow. So I don't know. Budget's law now. That's a big deal here in North Carolina.
Yes, $30 billion in there. Biggest budget we've ever had.
Yeah. Became law Tuesday at midnight. And by Tuesday at midnight, I mean, like, Monday is 11:59 and then midnight is Tuesday. Like the amount of time I had to spend to determine what midnight Tuesday meant, I'm a little embarrassed by. The governor allowed it to become law without his signature. Obviously Medicaid expansion. We've talked about the budget many times. The governor did a number of bill signings on Monday and allowed other things to become law without his signature. This week has been largely kind of quiet at the legislature, but lawmakers are drawing maps. This is not a process that is open to the public. It is not something they're broadcasting on YouTube like they have in the past. But I saw Senator Ralph Heiss, for example, who rarely comes for skeleton sessions when we're in session but not actually voting. But he was there all week, and I said, "Why are you here?" He said, "Well, I'm drawing maps." So that process is going forward. Speaker of the House said we may see maps next week, late next week. They may release congressional, state, and House maps.
What I've heard, and plan could be different because, again, this is all happening behind closed doors. We don't really know what's going on. It sounded like the plan was for them to draw the congressional maps first, put those out, and then wait a week to essentially give members of the state legislature a week to figure out or talk amongst themselves. Okay, I want to run for this seat. You can run for this seat, whatever. Figure out who's not going to be returning to the legislature. And then they're going to come back and draw the legislative maps after that.
Yeah, and the speaker, that was what I had heard as well. The speaker did not make it sound like that. But as I think back of that conversation in my mind, I'm not 100% whether he was talking about map releases or votes, which are, slightly different things.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But you may see some maps late next week. On Tuesday, both the House and Senate plan to hold override votes. There are 5 bills that Governor Cooper has vetoed that are sitting ready for an override attempt. No doubt a successful attempt. They're not going to try that without the numbers.
Right. There's no drama there.
No drama there. It's the 2 election bills, 749 and 747, that deal with mail-in ballots, one of them, and other election law changes, and the other kind of totally overhauls the State Board of Elections. Reg reform, that's House Bill 600. That's a bunch of environmental laws, business regulations that would be rolled back. 678, S678, that's the clean energy bill that says instead of renewable energy in state code, it would say clean energy to give nuclear power a boost.
It's basically a pro-nuclear bill, notably written by Senator Paul Newton, the former president of Duke Energy.
Right. One of the most notable energy policy lawmakers in the state Senate, who just so happens to be a former state president for Duke Energy, the largest energy concern in the state. How'd that happen? Also, the appointments bill is up for a veto override. That's Senate Bill 512. That's the one that takes a number of appointments away from the governor and either gives them to the legislature or to other members of the executive branch, like the agriculture commissioner or whatnot.
Yeah, and several of these, pretty much as soon as they get overridden, as soon as the legislature does override these vetoes, pass them into law, there's going to be lawsuits.
Right.
Cooper is going to sue over this appointments one. And he'll probably sue over the elections board one, maybe both elections bills.
Someone will sue over the election bills, whether it's the administration or not. You're absolutely right about that. And then we'll have those fun periods where we just write about it forever.
So you'll be hearing more about all those bills, even after those veto rides are successful.
I'll just run through a handful of things that the governor let become law without his signature. At least the ones that stood out to me. House Bill 8, it's a grab bag of stuff, but one of them is the not pornographic website age verification language that we've talked about in the past, where pornographic websites are going to have to kind of run your name through a database, it sounds like. I'm still not 100% on how that works, but before they allow you to view the site to make sure minor children are not doing it. House Bill 361, that deals with disability rights in North Carolina, which is a watchdog, a federally funded watchdog on the state's mental health and disability services system. They're basically going to have to report things to the legislature they didn't before, but it's more of a shot across the bow, like, hey, we don't like some of the things you're doing, and we're going to keep
they sue a lot, both the legislature and state government.
Yeah, and there was one lawsuit in particular called the Samantha R. lawsuit, R for anonymity sake. They don't put the woman's last name in it, but if you want to Google Disability Rights North Carolina, Samantha R. It has to do with how we serve people who have these challenges in life, and whether it's in a home or versus a more of a facility type setting. So you can read more about that. And then the final thing that I'll highlight is the high school athletics thing. That there is some language added to a bill, and I don't even remember which one. Oh, I think it was
an insurance. It was an
Senate
auto
bill.
Insurance bill.
It was Senate Bill 452. Yeah, a broad insurance bill. That was, I think, 20 pages of insurance stuff, and they tacked 20 pages of gutting the High School Athletics Association in there. So that has become law without the governor's signature there. On the budget, you did a story, and I think it's been a week ago, about kind of the infrastructure focus in this budget. A lot of water and sewer, but $2 billion in water and sewer money. Tell us a little bit, more about that.
Yeah, so $3 billion total into economic development projects. There were a couple of really big ticket items like NC Innovation, which is this thing to give grants to universities. That got $500 million. The Global Trans Park out in Kinston got $350 million on top of the however many billions of dollars.
It's so close. That's so close to working. Close to working.
It just needs a little more. But yeah, the big chunk of it was for these water and sewer projects, and this is it's mostly aimed at letting smaller, more rural communities build out water lines, sewer lines that they probably wouldn't be able to afford to do on their own anyways. And the idea is to help bring in development, whether that means houses or factories. Everyone uses water, everyone flushes toilets, and if you have a tiny community with very small, very old pipes, you can't really get your development done. And it's not a sexy part of the budget at all, but Senator Berger, when he was talking to us after the budget passed, he listed that, I think, as one of his top 3 things that were most important in the budget. It's like Medicaid expansion, raises, and these water and sewer projects. So, even if it's not, like, oh, we're going to build some sewer lines, people kind of roll their eyes. It's actually very important for economic development.
Absolutely. It's a real big deal. And there is some tension, though, between areas that are growing really fast and need that help for infrastructure and money that is going to areas where they're not growing, and that's why they need the help, because customers are leaving and they don't have the customer base. Maybe a factory closes that used a lot of water, and now it's like, okay, well, we don't have this big paying customer anymore, but we also don't, the pipes are going bad, and we still have people living here who need who need good water. So there is that tension between growing and non-growing areas. There's also a question of when you do earmarks for the legislative process, it's lawmakers picking the projects, often picking the projects in their area, of course, and that depends on who's got the power. Instead of going through kind of a administration, the Department of Environmental Quality process where it's scored and each project is weighed, and maybe you get a grant and maybe you don't. And then someone pointed this out to me today. I had not thought about it. When you look at the number of projects that are in the budget, the water and sewer projects that are given round numbers, like $12 million just on the nose, how much does that tell you about whether or not that project is shovel ready? Because they clearly don't have the actual cost to put in the budget, because I guarantee you all these things don't end in zero.
Yeah.
So that'll be something interesting to watch as we go forward, is how quickly some of this money gets spent, how much of it has been put toward projects that aren't ready yet. Now, of course, they can come back in and they can tweak this in the future. But
there's little to no oversight over this money too. So you see these round numbers and you're like, I don't think anyone submitted an RFP on this. It's just kind of them giving some money. They said that there was a scoring process, but I think probably a big part of the scoring process was, does an important legislator live in your district?
Right. Although it's also spread out quite a bit. Obviously it's going to flow more to certain lawmakers' districts. I saw the Cleveland County example, home to Speaker of the House Tim Moore. This isn't a water and sewer project, but they're getting a new courthouse. No one's hiding from this. They're putting out press releases that say, "Look at all this money I brought home." So that's the way the budget works sometimes.
Yep.
I'll mention quickly, school boards are working to implement what we called the Parents' Bill of Rights, what lawmakers called the Parents' Bill of Rights. That's the one that says you can only talk about sexuality in certain situations, not in, I can't remember if it was K through 4th grade as part of the curriculum, I believe is where they landed. And then it also says If a kid wants to change pronouns, then you're supposed to tell the parents. But it also had all sorts of requirements that you have to put curriculum stuff online. There, I believe, was some part of the bill that dealt with the process for getting books removed from public libraries. I may be mashing up a couple of bills, but anyway.
No, yeah, you're right. And it would also, and I think this is probably the part that is a little bit more concerning to school boards, is it has all these rules for streamlining the book banning process, or putting these your classroom materials online. And if you don't do it, then parents can sue you and get a bunch of money. And that's kind of the stick in the bill to make sure that schools actually do this. And that they could be looking at the prospect of losing some big dollar lawsuits.
Yeah, we had a story WRAL did. I'm assuming Emily Walkenhorst wrote it, but if not, I apologize. This week, if you want to know more about that, schools are basically working to implement all of this. They have until, I believe, January 1st to get that done. We also had a story. Eric Miller here at WRAL did this story, and we've done it before. Kids in the foster system sleeping on the floor at Department of Social Services offices. It's continuing to happen. We just have this real shortage of foster families, which has long been an issue, but it was really exacerbated by the pandemic. I mean, if you think about it, you're scared to bring people into your house during a viral pandemic. And then we just haven't rebounded, is my understanding from the reporting there. 10,200 kids in North Carolina in the foster care system right now. Wake County has 410 foster kids younger than 18 right now in its system, but just 95 foster families to try to take care of those kids. That's obviously a 4-to-1 ratio, and that's here in Wake County where we have a larger population. So.
Yeah, I mean, biggest county in the state, over 1 million people, only 95 foster families. That's not a recipe for success in terms of getting all those kids placed.
Yeah, and I mean, so you end up with kids sleeping in offices because, social services takes them from their parents, and then they have to be somewhere. And we just don't seem to have been able to solve that. I did notice in Eric's story this North Carolina does not have a dual licensure process. That means there are 2 separate approval processes for foster care families and adoption. So I don't know if that's some low-hanging fruit to kind of make the process more efficient. I don't know enough about this area, but I did note that in his story that we have 2 separate processes to approve parents, whether it's foster care or adoption.
And this is something the legislature's talked about a little bit in recent years. There was the Foster Parents Bill of Rights that came up, I think, in the last session, but I don't believe became law. The new abortion law does include some increased funding for foster
That's right.
families. So, there are some attempts at the legislature to address this problem, but it hasn't really, grabbed a ton of attention.
And I know that there has been some work on reforming the overall system beyond just the money that you mentioned too, which was somewhat significant money, if I remember, in the abortion bill. But with healthcare, when it comes to healthcare and how that is apportioned and where you have to live, and as kids move around, if you think about if a kid is in this foster home and moves to another foster home in another county, well, what happens to their doctor, to their insurance? So I know the state is struggling with this, and there's a lot of people with big hearts at the legislature that are on that problem. So quickly, I'll tell you, a new lawsuit has been filed. Yay. North Carolina, I'm reading from some coverage here, WRAL coverage. North Carolina used to require people to live in state a year before they could vote, but that was previously ruled unconstitutional. Now it's 30 days, and the North Carolina Alliance for Retired Americans says that is unconstitutional as well. Lawsuit filed in federal court Monday. This past Monday, and partly suing because this is a popular place for retired people. They're worried, like, if somebody, whether they're retired or not, moves to North Carolina 30 days or 20 days before an election, well, they can't vote, and they can't vote. They're not supposed to vote in their old state either, I guess, because they don't live there anymore.
Right.
So what do? They fall through the hole. One guess who the lawyer is.
Yeah, if you followed state or national politics at all in the last few years, you're going to guess that it's Mark Elias.
Yeah, Democrats, y'all ain't got but one lawyer in the whole country that handles election lawsuits. Is it just Mark Elias? Has he cornered this market? Where you at?
It's pretty much just him. I mean, half of our redistricting lawsuits he's been involved in. The big election fraud scandal in 2018 that people remember with the GOP candidate. He was involved in bringing that. I mean, any any big election lawsuit you can think of.
Yeah,
probably
the one that moved the absentee ballot deadline that, I mean, triggered the bill, one of the bills we're talking about now, 747, which is to change the absentee ballot deadline, was triggered by a lawsuit that was filed, I believe, during the pandemic and then settled. That was part of it. That was Elias. So, I mean, he just seems to be the only name in the business. Speaking of elections, Tuesday is election day in some municipalities around the state, including Cary, Durham, and Fayetteville. If that snuck up on you, do your research and get out there and vote, please. Kathy Truitt, Superintendent of Public Education, we call it Public Instruction, Superintendent of Public Instruction, put out a press release on the state budget that I found interesting. Truitt, a Republican, said she's disappointed we didn't get the double-digit pay increases for educators that she had hoped for, but she did like $13 million going to the Advanced Teaching Roles Initiative. I know that's something I think I've heard Phil Berger talk about.
Yeah.
As well, which is that like mentoring teacher, like a mentor teacher, or?
Well, so the idea is, as we are not giving big raises to veteran teachers, we're seeing a lot of veteran teachers leave the profession. And, some of them, it might mean leaving education entirely. Other people are, finding, cushy jobs in the district office or becoming principals and assistant principals, things like that. And Berger said that the idea behind this is to give more veteran teachers a little bit of a pay boost. It would basically be at the discretion, I think, of either their principal or maybe the superintendent, to basically just convince them to stay in the classroom. And they could, potentially also, I think, get reduced teaching duties in exchange for doing some mentorship of, younger people. So basically just, for people who've been there, 10, 15, 20 years who are thinking about leaving, kind of give them some incentives to stay if they're good. The idea is to, keep the good teachers because we don't want to lose good teachers.
Interesting program. $13 million. I don't know how far that goes in a state, but she said it was the first ever direct investment for the state in the program. So maybe that's more to come.
Talking to Senator Berger about this, and this was a couple weeks ago, so I may be paraphrasing wrong, but he framed it as kind of a pilot program. Let's start it off, a little bit of seed funding, see how it goes, maybe come back and add some more money in future budgets.
I'll also note from Truitt's release, more than $250 million for school construction and funding for reduced meal copays. So if you qualify for a free or reduced lunch, the way I understand it, and forgive me if I screw this up, but it's not going to be a reduced lunch anymore. You just qualify for a free lunch because we're getting rid of the copay. I think that is how that works. I'll also mention quickly Mo Green. He's a former Guilford County school superintendent and has been for several years and is now the outgoing director of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. He announced a run for superintendent of public instruction, so he'll be on the ballot, at least in the 2024 primaries. He's a Democrat, so I assume he's running as a Democrat, although I didn't check, but that seemed like a good guess to me. So. We'll talk a little bit about the Meredith poll. I know this is a little old. It came out maybe a week and a half ago, but I saw some things in it that I thought were kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, nobody they put pictures. I thought this was interesting. They found some pictures of all the state's most powerful politicians and said, who is this? And nobody could get it. People knew who Roy Cooper was, but that was about it. Nobody knows who's running for governor. They might know the names, but they couldn't put the faces to it. No one knows who Phil Berger or Tim Moore are, which I'm sure they're probably happy with.
Yeah, I've done stories like that before where I go to a public place with pictures, and it's one time I remember when Miss South Carolina and the Miss America pageant seemed to have some trouble with where the United States was on a map. I can't remember. I went and stood in a Walmart parking lot. This is in Georgia, 15, 20 years ago, with a map of the world, and I asked people to point to the United States of America, and it was stunning how few people were able to successfully accomplish this task. I got a lot of people pointing to Mongolia, for example. It was weird, man. I only did it once because it was real depressing, but anywho, what I wanted to highlight from that Meredith poll, abortion. Republicans support the new law by a large margin. We obviously moved our abortion deadline from 20 weeks down to 12, and there are more hoops you have to jump through at any time now under the new law. Democrats are opposed to the new law by a large margin, but this was what was interesting, according to David McGlennon, who runs the Meredith poll. Older voters disapprove of the new law much more than do younger voters. And this is what McClellan said. It's somewhat surprising younger voters support the new law to the degree that they do. That cuts against the popular narrative that the issue of abortion may drive young people to the polls in 2024 and that this will give Democrats a large advantage.
Yeah, that surprised me. I mean, you usually associate younger people being more liberal, older people being more conservative, but kind of had the opposite reaction to the abortion law that you'd expect.
Another thing the good people over at the Meredith poll noted was that Attorney General Josh Stein, he's got a 3-1 lead over kind of relatively recently announced former state Supreme Court Justice Mike Morgan, who's running for governor. Obviously, Stein and Morgan are both Democrats. So about a third of people who were polled, Democrats, said that they would vote for Stein, 11% for Morgan. That's actually not that bad. But almost half of likely Democratic primary voters, 46%, indicated they were undecided. And McClellan said in some of the poll release that, Stein has been running for a while. He's got a lot of money. He's got all these advantages. But those apparent advantages have not guaranteed Stein the nomination, with Morgan showing some strength after very little time as an announced candidate and a big deficit in fundraising. I think everybody's money, literally and figuratively, is still on Stein in that race, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think Morgan surprised some people with the showing that he had in that poll.
Yep. Quickly, I'll mention former Congressman Mark Walker, who's running for governor on the Republican side. His mom and dad have been in the hospital this week. I saw that on Facebook. When I spoke to Walker Thursday evening, his mom was still in the ICU, but they're hopeful that she gets to go home before too long. And I just thoughts for them. That's
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, that's no fun. Emily's List endorsed Senator Rachel Hunt in the lieutenant governor's race. Obviously, Senator Hunt, Democrat, running for lieutenant governor. No surprise that Emily's List, which endorses female candidates, looks for strong female candidates around the country. Or is it around the country, or are they just in North Carolina?
No, they're nationally. Yep.
There you go. That's what I thought. Not surprising they would endorse her, but I had not thought about this until I saw this language. She would only be the state's second female lieutenant governor.
After Bev Perdue,
who was also former governor. And of course, Senator Ben Clark is running against Hunt in that Democratic primary, and I think Delmont Crawford may also be running. I haven't checked that recently, but I know Senator Clark is. Yeah, he would only be, I assume, I know he would only be the state's second black lieutenant governor after current Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. So it just always strikes me when it's like, boy, we really still have kind of a long way to go. To kind of show that we actually, as voters, embrace equality.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine that race is going to get much, much more crowded. I mean, you usually have 10, 12 people running for lieutenant governor anytime it's open.
It definitely will be crowded on the Republican side. Hunt may have scared some people off, given her name recognition and fundraising prowess, and Democrats they think it's someone's turn.
Yeah. But man, talk about best job in state government. I mean, make $150,000 a year, and you don't have to do anything.
You don't show up. You're on the state school board. I think you're on the community college board. I can't remember. You've got a few constitutional duties. You get a house.
Yeah.
In Raleigh. I don't know if it's just an office or if you get to sleep in it. I don't know how that works.
I think it's just office space, but you sleep there if you want to. Bring a cot.
It's a pretty nice house.
It's a nice house.
It's right downtown. It's spitting distance to the governor's office. So, speaking of spitting distance to the governor's office, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who is, of course, a Republican running for governor, his campaign announced a rally. They're going to hold that in Taylorsville, which is up kind of northwest of Charlotte, on Saturday, October 14th. So not tomorrow Saturday, but Saturday after that. The event will feature music, food, special guest speakers, and more. That special guest speakers, I don't know, that could get interesting. But
we'll see.
Yeah, they're going to rally it up. And that's all I've got, except for a personal note, which is I am going to be out of here before too long. Sometime between now and the end of the year, I will be leaving WRAL. I'll be leaving journalism. It's an amicable parting, and I appreciate the station for kind of working with me on some flexibility of the actual leave date. But I'm going to go do something else, and, sometimes it's just time. Comes for all of us.
We're going to miss you, Travis. I hope that I wasn't the one who drove you out. I will say I've been here less than a year, and now you're leaving. Take it a little personally. No, you've been great to work with, and even when we were competitors in my past career, I always really respected you. So big loss for journalism here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was not you, but I did find myself complaining too much about what I was doing day to day. My advice to people is like, man, try to focus on what you think is important or what you think is interesting or what you think is fun, and don't listen to the voices around you that tell you ought to be doing other things. And then anybody who's been around me the last couple of years will probably understand when I say once you complain enough, that's a you problem, man. Like you gotta make a move, and this is a hard job. So thanks to everybody who's going to keep doing it. I'm looking forward to letting it be y'all's problem because this job will burn you out. So some hopeful news for me. I hope. Haven't figured out what's next, but I got to real soon. So.
Well, we're going to keep going strong, and we'll need to find somebody else to give us Kurt Vonnegut quotes on the regular.
And I should note, WRAL is replacing me. There's a job posting out there now, so the NC Capital team will continue to be full strength and bringing you the news that it can, and I'll be here for a few more weeks, so there'll be a few more wraps, and I hope y'all stick with us next time on The Wrap.